Chapter 2. Blood samples and mashed potatoes. The convoy rumbled up the rough roadway, approaching the military base. The truck I was riding in slowed and came to a stop. A few minutes passed, while the men guarding the gates checked the right boxes on their clipboards and radioed the proper people to tell them of our triumphant return before allowing us to enter. Then, finally, the heavy steel doors creaked open, and the truck sprang back to life to carry us inside. Once inside, all of us filed out of the trucks and quickly assembled ourselves into straight and orderly rows. The tall, concrete walls enveloped us and blocked out all views of the outside world. The only thing I had a clear view of was the sky. The sun had since slipped out of sight and dusk was swiftly approaching. When you were in the base was all there was. The rest of the world outside of your military life ceased to exist. We arranged ourselves in neat rows, awaiting inspection and dismissal. I didn't recognize the raven-haired officer who emerged from the leading truck and stalked over to us. He stiffly paced through the ranks of men, looking for even a toe out of order. Not finding anything to yell about, he returned to the head of the formation. I didn't recognize the dark-haired, gaunt man. Based on his body language, I could assume he was the one in charge of the operation to move the townspeople.
Men,
he shouted.
All of the people from the town have been ushered out of harm's way.
No one moved. It wasn't our turn to say anything yet.
Thanks to your work, this conflict won't touch those innocent lives.
He boomed.
Good work, soldiers.
He finished. That was our cue.
Sir, yes, sir.
We responded in unison. The officer waited for the echo bouncing off the walls to finish.
Now.
He started.
Head back to your assigned posts and get some food and get some rest.
He waved us away.
Dismissed.
We saluted, and the officer returned it before the orderly formation of men broke apart, and everyone headed to where they were supposed to go. Most of them headed toward the walls to take on another duty, or to one of the various sheet metal buildings where there were barracks and a mess hall. A handful of us, myself included, made our way to one of the guard towers. When I reached the door at the structure's base, I stepped to the side, leaned against the wall, and waited for the other 3 members of my squad to turn up. I didn't have to wait long. Alvin, Barrett, and Ferguson turned up together.
Ready to get poked and prodded, boys?
I asked sarcastically. They all groaned in unison. We entered the door at the base of the tower and began the winding descent down the stairs into the underground portion of Fort Romekin. A plain metal door marked the threshold between the above-ground outpost and the underground bunker. It was never closed and locked when soldiers were filing back underground, but as soon as the last body stepped through the portal, it would slide shut behind them. Step after step, the warm rays of the sun dwindled and were overtaken by sterile, humming artificial lamplight. Hopping off the last step, we were met with 4 identical hallways. We knew where to go and headed down the one straight in front of the final flight of stairs. This one led to the medical bay, where we would get looked over, and then on to the mess hall and quarters where we could refuel and rest. Alongside the rest of the soldiers stationed underground, we flowed down the concrete corridor to the medical bay. The medical bay was a sterile, white room with dozens of beds divided by shiny white plastic curtains. The back of the room was lined with glass cabinets full of medicine and foul-smelling balms. If soldiers were injured or too sick to work, they would be sent here to be looked after. The beds were rarely occupied, however. The base was short-handed, so unless a soldier were bleeding out, he would be sent back to work. When we entered the room, the medical staff were already hurrying up and down the rows of men checking them over. Everyone stood motionless and obediently allowed themselves to be examined. Flashlights were shown into eyes, thermometers were jammed into mouths, and blood pressure cuffs were inflated over arms. Those soldiers stationed in the underground bunker were subjected to this after every excursion we took. The reason being that sickness or disease can spread rapidly in close quarters, especially in the absence of fresh, outside air. Despite the rough examinations, it was considered a privilege to be assigned to the underground bunker. Underground is where the military stored special equipment and housed secret military documents and projects. Anyone high enough up the chain of command had their quarters underground too. If an enemy bombing run decimated the above-ground base, there was a good chance anyone deep beneath the earth would survive. My group wasn't considered high up or particularly important, but every wheel needs cogs to turn it. I tugged uncomfortably at the patch on my uniform's arm that designated me as one of those gears. Protecting the military commanders and the secrets of the bunker were our purpose. When it was my turn to be examined, I saw that it was my favorite member of the medical staff who would have the honor of putting up with me while I was subjected to the battery of medical questions and tests. Ronald was a balding man in his mid-40s. He was a former soldier, but after his bad heart took him out of the trenches, he decided to carry on as a member of the medical staff.
Doing all right, Rosid?
He asked in his typical, friendly manner. He was already scribbling on the papers that would determine whether or not I rejoined the others or spent the next 2 weeks alone in quarantine.
Well enough,
I responded. Despite being tired, I did my best to look healthy and alert. He didn't look up from his clipboard. Ronald went through the motions of checking out my vital signs to ensure that I looked well enough to mingle with the general population. After he finished, he let out a sigh.
Congratulations.
He said sarcastically.
You get to give me a blood sample.
Again?
I protested.
I have to do that after almost every mission.
I pouted.
I know.
Ronald said sympathetically.
But you know how it goes. We can't test everyone's blood, so a few of you get randomly selected to have your blood checked for pathogens.
He produced a syringe and motioned for my arm.
It's to protect everyone.
He pressed. Alvin, Barrett, and Ferguson had already finished being examined.
Aren't you finished yet?
Questioned Barrett. The three of them hovered around me like a group of worried mother hens, much to Ronald's annoyance.
We'll wait for you outside,
offered Ferguson, sensing that they were about to get a tongue-lashing from Ronald.
Thanks.
I sighed. It may have been a random selection, but it seemed that I got randomly selected more than anyone else. Even though I hated needles, I relented and offered Ronald my arm. Another reason I was fond of Ronald was that he could stick my arm painlessly. Before I knew it, the needle had taken a drink from my arm and filled the body of the glass syringe like some sort of blood-sucking insect.
There we go,
he said, pressing a bandage on the place where he had stuck the needle.
I'll let you know if you caught some kind of deadly disease in that town. You're fine if you don't hear from me in a day or two. No news is good news,
he joked. I had been through this procedure enough times before, but he went through his script all the same. I went through my own script of thanking him for his time and care, and exited the medical bay. As I was leaving, Alvin caught my arm and said,
You hear the news?
What news?
I asked, perplexed.
Not here.
Barrett cut in.
We shouldn't gossip out in the open like this. We can talk in the mess hall.
Alvin looked like he was about to burst with whatever news he was holding in, but he relented and kept his mouth shut. The mess hall was a short walk from the medical bay. It was a large room with rows and rows of metal tables with bench seating fused to them. At the back of the room was the kitchen and serving area, where the kitchen staff piled heavy globs of food onto the trays of hungry soldiers. Keeping an army fed was no small task. We all occasionally took a turn working in the kitchen, and the staff there worked harder and in worse conditions than some of us in the field. The four of us got into the line and slid our trays in front of us on the waist-high metal rack.
What have we got today?
I mused. The food in the cafeteria wasn't gourmet by any stretch of the imagination, but it beat field rations. The gloved hand of the kitchen worker spooned a hearty portion of mashed potatoes onto my tray. We moved down the line.
So, what's this news?
I asked.
It's a pretty big deal,
assured Alvin. Another hand poured a stew of meat and carrots onto my tray.
Did you notice anything strange about that little pep talk we all got in the yard?
Alvin goaded. A rain of peas clattered onto my tray.
Just tell me,
I begged.
after we sit down.
reminded Ferguson. We rushed to the least occupied table and slid in together.
Spit it out.
I said, rapping my knuckles on the table after each word. Alvin shot a hopeful look to both Ferguson and Barrett, who nodded in assent.
Okay.
Began Alvin.
I heard that the big man himself is here visiting Fort Romkin.
Have a little respect.
Scolded Barrett.
Call him by his title and name. General Dunn.
I scrunched up my face in disbelief.
Who did you hear that from?
I asked, not convinced.
I heard it from Ryan, one of the guys from Martin's unit. He was near the front of the lineup in the yard.
He replied.
He said that the black-haired officer giving the little speech today wasn't one of the normal ones from this base. Ryan could see the officer's insignia. He was ranked too high to be giving that talk to a group like ours. On top of that, Ryan said that he recognized him.
I leaned in, intrigued. There might be something to this claim after all.
Did you catch his name?
I asked. Alvin paused for dramatic effect, pleased that he had my attention now.
No, but Ryan said he saw that particular officer when he was still stationed in the capital city, Gled. He saw him with the...
Barrett cleared his throat and narrowed his eyes at Alvin.
He saw him with General Dunn.
Gulped Alvin.
That scary-looking officer was accompanying the general while he was inspecting the troops before sending them out to the front.
He finished.
I'm willing to bet that General Dunn is here in the fort right now.
Alvin grinned like we were getting a visit from a celebrity. I, on the other hand, was worried. Our group sat in silence for a minute or two, thinking about what a visit from the most important man in Lude and his entourage could mean for Fort Romkin. Ferguson mumbled.
The normal officers also never say good work.
We allowed ourselves a nervous laugh at Ferguson's observation.
I wonder why General Dunn didn't give the speech.
Ferguson added.
He's too important and busy.
I chuckled.
We were lucky to get his right-hand man.
The general only appeared for big speeches or events.
I heard they found another dead body outside the walls.
Inserted Barrett. It wasn't uncommon to find a soldier or traveler who had lost their lives battling the elements, but this was the fourth time over the last 6 months that a body was found on the outskirts of Fort Romkin.
Was the person a soldier? Or a civilian?
I asked.
They couldn't tell. The body was torn up pretty badly.
Barrett muttered. The mood at the table darkened. Sometimes the bodies were soldiers. Sometimes they were civilians. Other times, no one could tell. But they always had one thing in common. It was clear that the people didn't die of exposure or exhaustion. It was like a large animal had attacked them. But no animal would do that to a body. No one was sure it wasn't just a rumor, but it had the men on edge regardless.
Could that be why General Dunn is here? Maybe he wants to get to the bottom of it.
Offered Ferguson. Alvin, Barrett, and I shrugged. But of course, we had no way of knowing. As we ate, I told the three of them what had happened in town when I caught a couple of soldiers robbing a house.
What a disgrace.
Spat Barrett.
I wish I had been there.
I'm glad he hadn't been there. The duty-driven Barrett might have given them too severe of a beating. Soldiers fighting amongst themselves was forbidden, and the punishment for everyone involved would have been harsh. I continued and told them about the box's contents and how all they would have gotten for their trouble were a few silver rings and a stack of faded family photos. Ferguson stabbed dejectedly at his peas.
I wonder how my son is doing.
He murmured. I reached across the table and gave his hand a squeeze.
All I know is that he'll be proud of his papa,
I assured him. A faint smile tugged at the corners of Ferguson's lips, and his mood lightened a little. We carried on eating and joking just as we did each day, forgetting about the rumor of the important visitor. Alvin doing his best to be the center of attention, Ferguson laughing along, and Barrett doing his best to seem like he wasn't enjoying himself. After finishing our meal, we brought our trays to the designated area and prepared to bunk down for the night. I made sure to freshen up and remove any stray peas from my teeth. By the time I finished, it was nearing the time for lights out. Like clockwork toy soldiers running on a predetermined track, each weary body dutifully filed into the sleeping quarters, found their designated cots, and collapsed onto them. The lights in the underground sleeping chamber dimmed. The heavy breathing of men softened and slowed. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in my head. My mind drifted back to the stack of family photos in the little wooden box. Where was the family from the photos now? Were they safe? Were the little boy and little girl getting enough to eat? Were they still together? I thought of my own family. The image of my mother and father was still blurry, like looking through frosted glass. I thought of my older brother. I tried to think of the happy times we had together, taking care of the house, worrying about my studies and cooking meals. Remembering what I had lost caused my chest to tighten. Where did he disappear to? I thought. I pushed the thoughts and memories away and did my best to clear my mind. The soft, rhythmic chorus of my new family's breathing calmed me as I drifted off to sleep.